Foundations of OER. My name is Melissa Wells. I'm at the University of Mary Washington, and Courtney is at the Francis Marion University School of Education, where she is now dean. She was at Mary Washington when we started this project together, and so that's how our paths have crossed, and we're really excited to share how this project evolved with you today. Okay, so oh wait, rolling, like you want me to keep talking? You're good? Okay.
Yes, it stopped, finally.
Okay, I'm gonna toss this back over to Courtney.
Yeah, so as Melissa said, we were both at Mary Washington together, and just to give you a little bit of background about where this project started from, Melissa and I were both teaching a course in Foundations of Education, and we were not happy with the textbooks that we were finding in addition to the cost of the textbooks. So we will go through how, again, in more detail, how this all evolved, but I just wanted to let you know that that's our connection before I came here. So if you could please, in the chat box, just introduce yourself and tell us your professional role. And yeah, great.
If anyone wants to introduce pets as well, we don't you're welcome. So Snickerdoodle, my lemon beagle, is behind us, enjoying Zoom as well.
Teaching and learning librarian, great. Music theater librarian coordinator, theater instructor, okay, lots of theater and librarian. Anyone else want to? Okay, let's see. Texas, gosh, people from everywhere. Librarian, liberal arts and open ed, Marble Institution librarian. Oh, wow, that's great. Love our librarians. Okay, so hopefully this will inform your work as well. So if you could go to the next slide. Today, our goals, and you will see also that there is a place where you can scan to get the link address for the slides if you don't have time to write things down. And Kathy, I don't know if they'll be posted somewhere.
My impression is that they're going to be released openly, hopefully without injudicious comments.
Okay. So we want to just establish a foundation for the project, contextualized in teacher preparation, because Melissa and I are both in teacher preparation programs. Describe the process of creating, publishing, and implementing this OER textbook in 2 Foundations of Education courses at 2 different institutions, at Mary Washington and then at Francis Marion. Describe issues of equity and accessibility in our project's design. Present preliminary implementation data that we found from researching the impact of the textbook, and then discuss implications for equity and accessibility of OER in various contexts. So the foundations. For our project, I'm sorry, my chat is in front of me, so I have to move it. We found that there were very few education-focused OER resources out there. And our goal, when Melissa actually really applied for the grant and asked me to come on board, was to create a free resource that was more interactive and inclusive than traditional Foundations of Education materials. And we really wanted to take a critical lens focus. The grant was through VIVA, which is a virtual library of Virginia, awarded in 2019. It was a $10,000 grant that funded stipends, contributor stipends. So we had various faculty at UMW as well as professionals contribute to the book. So we gave them stipends. We gave stipends to student reviewers. We had students review the textbook for us, graphic design, and then to present at various conferences. And the link at the bottom is to the textbook, which hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end to show you a little bit about that. So research says that OER can improve end-of-course grades and decrease DFW rates for all students, and that increased grades decrease DFW rates at greater rates for Pell recipient students, part-time students, and populations historically underserved by higher education.
So we'll talk a little bit now about the process of creating, publishing, and implementing this OER in our context as teacher preparers. For the planning process, it kind of had three different parts of the content. As we've heard in several sessions, we were really thinking about whose voices were centered or silenced, and how do we recenter those voices or perspectives that tend to be silenced, especially in the field of education. Interactivity was really important to us as well. We knew that OER had a unique aspect of allowing readers to engage with it in ways that a traditional textbook does not. And so we wanted to see how we could frame this so that the readers can bring themselves and the text to their meaning making experience, which also related to the framing. How do we guide our readers to be critical thinkers and educators capable of inclusive and equitable practice? Because equity is really important for us for making future teachers who are willing to do the equity work in their future classrooms. So the process we used to create it involved backwards design. So if you're not familiar with this process, this is a thing we teach our future teachers. So basically we start with the end in mind, and then we create materials and instruction to match what we want the outcome to be. We identify those expert contributors that Courtney mentioned. So some of them came from our colleagues at our institution, some came from the community, some came from other institutions, which I think was really unique in allowing us to center a lot of different expert voices. Courtney and I met via Zoom to plan and write every week, because you might have noticed we got this grant in 2019 and something happened in 2020. So all of this occurred during COVID and over Zoom. So we are pros at this now. But yes, hopefully as life gets back to normal, some more in person we would recommend if you're writing, but you can do this with collaborations on Zoom for sure. We used a lot of Creative Commons media. I consulted with our Office of Disability Resources at UMW as well, and I'm still ongoing consulting with them to make sure that our pieces as as accessible as possible. And we finished it in about 1.5 years. So some design elements, like I mentioned, we wanted to use a lot of multimedia and interactivity. Those included things like images, videos, podcasts, the H5P elements, and representations of diversity. So I found this really awesome website that is all pictures of teachers and educators and children and students. There are pictures taken in actual schools that do embrace diversity and represent diversity. So that was really exciting to find all those. Our cover image is one of those as well. We also infused interactive boxes throughout the text, which included pause and ponder boxes. You see an example here. Again, bringing that reflexivity into the process of who you were as the reader. Stop and investigate, that would allow our readers to do a little bit more inquiry. And then critical lens, which Courtney's going to talk about as we get into a deeper discussion about how we infused equity into this project as well. We published through Pressbooks, which was provided through our VIVA grant. It was expected at the time that we use that, so that's why we are housing it on Pressbooks. It is hosted on VIVA's site, but is also in some other repositories as well, like the Open Textbook Network, Merlot, some of those. Ease of updating has also been important for us because we've been able to get feedback from students and from other readers. We've been able to adjust some things and change them. So that's been really nice, a nice feature of using Pressbooks for the publishing of that. And finally, implementation. I piloted it in my foundations class in fall 2021. We do use a second text called The Dream Keepers that we do have available as an e-copy in the library, which meant that students could access all reading materials for the course completely for free. Courtney piloted it in her Foundations of Education class at Francis Marion in spring 2022. And so we had 82 total students that used the text during this past academic year.
Literally 41 and 41. We did not plan that. It just happened. It was like literally the same number of students. So, okay. So as Melissa mentioned, one of the main goals of this textbook was looking at equity and accessibility and having this critical lens stance towards the textbook. So, what we found, and what, those of you who have looked at Foundations of Education textbooks or even gone through school, there's a lot of whitewashing of traditional Foundations of Education textbooks. So Melissa, do you mind sharing that example that she just had with a colleague who uses the book that we used to use in the class, and she had a comment for Melissa?
Yeah, so my colleague mentioned to me this spring, she was like, I think I'm going to ask my students to watch this video about the Carlisle School because this is something important that I think our future teachers need to know about the history of American education, and it's not in the textbook. And I kind of said, yes, I totally agree. That's actually something we did choose to include in our history chapter because we thought that was really important. And for those of you who are not familiar, those refer to some of the indigenous boarding schools that, of course, did some atrocious things to our indigenous communities, trying basically equivalent to some genocide and just deculturization and assimilation. And so those kinds of elements often are not included in more traditional textbooks, and those are the kinds of things we felt that we had a responsibility to include in a text that was devoted to that idea of equity and a critical lens.
So, and along those lines, it was very important to us for students to have an opportunity to consider these issues from a variety of perspectives. So we weren't necessarily telling, right, a story. We were presenting information for students to be able to interact with and look at these different perspectives, and importantly, being prompted to do so through the stop and investigate, pause and ponder, and then these critical lens boxes, and examples here on this slide. This has to do with redlining. So these were the kinds of things where students could go in, they could interact. You can see that there are links embedded, and it was really an opportunity to go more deeply into issues that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to do just with a regular textbook. We really looked at the role of culture and language in teaching and learning. So that's also a theme within the textbook. We were really reaching for equitable accountability and representation in the text. And I think that we I think we did a pretty good job of it, but those were questions that we've asked of the students and of readers. We have gotten some reviews back and they have been very positive, so that's good. So we feel like those messages are getting out there. And then just want to talk about the importance of the instructor in this process. So yes, the students have this textbook, but it is key to have the facilitation of the instructor as teachers, as librarians, you're teachers as well. So, the role that's important of not just reading a text, but interacting with the text. Accessibility, again, was another essential aspect for the text, and the Pressbook features that were available were the headings, H5P, those interactive elements. We had interactive timelines. We have branching scenarios in the text, lots of multimedia, video with closed captions, images with alt text embedded. And then we had these general considerations of the financial accessibility. Again, the Foundations of Education textbooks can cost up to $150 is what our students were paying. And we just felt like that was not okay and wanted to create something that they could use for free. It also has great internet accessibility. They can download it as a PDF as well. We have an Appendix A that has some of those offline elements if it is downloaded. We have hyperlinks and footnotes and references. And then what's great is it works on any platform or device. So it's device agnostic. And then on the bottom of the slide, it does include some resources if you were interested in seeing some of the resources that we used for the accessibility piece.
And if you didn't get the link to the slides earlier, I will drop it in at the end again in case we gain any other people. So if you want to be able to click on some of those resources, I will make sure that you have access to those at the end. So I'm going to quickly go over a little bit of impact data from our pilot this past academic year. We had IRB approval to do an anonymous survey in our courses, both at UMW and at Francis Marion. We had 2 students start the survey at Francis Marion but not finish it, so we weren't able to use that data this year, but we're going to continue with our data collection process. What is interesting is the way this worked out was I actually gathered this information while the textbook was still being written, and so I was using our old traditional textbook, and so I was able to gather some comparative data at UMW. So we did end up with 5 traditional textbook responses and 6 OER textbook responses over the course of 3 different semesters. Our survey was both quantitative and qualitative, and it looked at things like how much of the book was read, rating of various criteria that we'll show you in just a minute, and the open-ended comments looked at key takeaways, suggestions, or other comments. also their prior experience with OER and their desire to use OER in future courses. Of course, this was only used with the pilot of OER because the traditional section would not have had any background for the use of OER. Our key findings from the quantitative data were that students did read more of the OER textbook. 100% of respondents said they read at least half of the OER textbook. Only 80% of respondents read at least half of the traditional textbook. So we did have more engagement with the text. Students did say that they wanted more OER in future classes. So even though only 67, actually all 67% never had used an OER before, all 100% said they wish to use them again in the future. And the OER textbook outperformed the traditional textbook on all the following criteria: accuracy of content, currency, relevance to their future careers, ability to keep you engaged or interested as a reader, integration of multimodal tools, the graphic visual design, accessibility, and the price. And so this was a Likert scale where 5 was the highest, 1 was the lowest. You'll see these 3 here were a full point. This one, the price was almost 2 full points above the traditional textbook, but all of them, the OER textbook was higher than the traditional textbook, so it did outperform the traditional one. Key findings from the qualitative parts of the survey. The main one was that my most exciting thing, as Courtney and I have been talking about, we do infuse a lot of equity in our courses, and the top takeaway did relate to diversity and inclusion. So our students said things about culturally relevant pedagogy, accessibility, inclusivity, harmfulness of this colorblind approach to pedagogy, which is where, oh, I don't see race, I don't need to see race, and we teach them that is actually very hurtful. That is against the work of equity we need to be doing in our classrooms. You'll see some of the other understandings here about professionalism, approaches and responsibilities, and general understandings. And what was really kind of interesting to me was when I compared this with the traditional textbook, their takeaways were much more surface level. Like you'll see this first one here, oh, the book focused on K through middle school. Like that's not really a takeaway that's going to influence their future careers like ours on diversity and inclusion. Being a teacher isn't the only job a teacher has. Teachers have autonomy, accuracy of the time, current updates, recurrence of themes, trends, and history. Those were very much more surface level than what we got from our OER text. So we were really excited to see that depth of understanding, especially with the equity focus in our OER textbook. Students also commented, I've never been aware of how useful OER resources were before. I know that more OER resources in college classrooms would be amazing. This text was so easy to navigate, and this OER was incredibly useful in gaining a better understanding on this course and getting a deeper understanding of the material. So those were a couple of student comments there. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of we're going to merge these two things here together. So we're going to consider about what our own roles with equity and OER, that we can discuss some of that, but also any other questions, comments, or experiences. We're opening to that as well. I'm going to go back to the other slide because there was more to think about there. But if you have other questions, comments, experiences that don't directly relate to this, feel free to unmute, type in the chat, whatever works for you all.
And while that's going on, I know that Simon was asking about, how did we work during our Zoom meetings? And we specifically had our Zoom meetings for writing because we knew that, it's so hard to put aside time for that. So we would touch base, we would go through kind of where we were and what was next. And then we would spend about 45 minutes, Melissa, each time, 50 minutes. Writing, and then we get back together, reconnect, and then talk about next steps. But we did have a collaborative, we were working on Google Docs, so we would be going in and collaborating that way.
And that was something that, because our timeline for the project was delayed a little bit because of this thing called COVID. Courtney was the associate dean at UMW at the time, and I also was working with our Center for Teaching. So both of us had huge demands on our time that semester of spring 2020 that we were not expecting. And so we realized we were going to keep getting pulled in so many different directions. So that's why we really started that weekly time to sit down and hold each other accountable and set goals. We used a Google Doc where we would kind of take notes about what we had accomplished and what our goals were. And I know that helped me a lot because at a teaching-centered institution, you can get pulled in so many different directions. And I know from all your roles as well, you had definitely experienced that. And so that helped us stay accountable.
This is such a good project, and your presentations have been amazing. Did you have a guide that you shared with the students for them to use to review it that you might be able to share with it? And I was also going to ask about the equitable accountability, if you had a rubric or a statement that you used to guide that.
Great question. So the first part was about, sorry, it just slipped my brain already. Was about the how to navigate the text.
No, the student
was about-
reviewers. The student reviewers, did they have a guide, or did you
Oh,
just hand them the thing and say review this?
Yes.
Is what I think.
yes, thank you. I missed the word reviewers. The student reviewers were basically given the same instrument as our IRB approved people. We just didn't have IRP approval. We used the student reviews for our VIVA report our final report back to that, but they were answering some of the same kinds of questions. Let me try to see if I can get back over to that. Like rating some of this. I asked them to let us know about strengths and weaknesses of the text as well, which wasn't quite the same as the students in the class because I asked them for key takeaways because I was more interested in their learning, but I did ask them for things we should change. And so they helped us with some, minor things that a link was broken here or things like that. So I'm going to go back into the text and fix that before the fall semester begins. So they did have a guide there.
That's awesome. How much did you pay each of them?
We paid them $50. So I was actually shocked because we had enough funding to do 10 $50 stipends, right, Courtney?
Yes.
Okay. We had almost 40 students indicate interest, which I was shocked by.
We're like, you really want to read a textbook? What
Right,
happened?
for fun, yeah. So we decided to do some random number assignments so that we had a diverse perspectives from our different programs. So we have elementary, secondary, and PK-12, which is like our music and art teachers, language teachers, special education also. We also are in the middle of teaching out our 5-year program and moving into a 4-year program. So we had those 2 different camps represented as well. So we had a nice cross-representation included with those reviews. And your second question, Kathy, was about equity.
Yeah, if you had a rubric for that, which is, that's such a weird, I don't even know rubrics, but yeah.
For the writing of the text or for the students to look at, or?
I don't remember. I just wrote equitable accountability, rubric, ? So I'm not sure exactly what I wanted to know.
Okay, we can just talk about equity and how that guided our work. Courtney, did you want to start off with anything about that, or do you want me to go first?
Well, I think, Kathy, Melissa and I have spent a lot of time looking at these issues, even as classroom teachers. We were both classroom teachers for many, many years. And so this notion of equity and what it means and accountability has been a part of our work for a long time. And so when we were thinking about this text, it was, what do we want? What would be sort of equitable practices that and ideas, that we would want to include. And so that critical lens is where, as we focus more on equity, it was kind of like, well, what about this critical lens idea, where within the text, students have an opportunity to really look at things from varied perspectives, and that it's, again, not whitewashed, and it's, inclusive of voices. And so we didn't actually have like a rubric that we were working from. It was more ideas about what students needed to know in relation to sort of key topics. So historical things that we, like Brown v. Board, well, that's fine, but what about Lemon Grove? And what about, so there were, I think from our personal work and then also from our experience with other foundation textbooks, it really became that, merging of ideas.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sure everyone in this room is thoroughly aware, but I think in this context, where critical is discussing breaking down systems of power, systems hegemony, and things like that. Not just like your mom saying, "Are you really wearing that shirt to school?"
Right. Right.
Yes, questioning, not just accepting the status quo, which is really important because some of these systems are set up to prioritize certain groups of people. When we want our pre-service teachers to be future in-service teachers who are truly capable of meeting the needs of all students, that's going to require some finesse with being critical and advocating for students. So that's why it was so important for that to be at the center of our work. I've dropped the link to the book in our chat, so I know many of you are librarians. If any of your education faculty are saying, hey, we would like a different kind of book for our Foundations of Education class, we'd love for you to take a look. Of course, it being open means that they can adjust it to their own contexts. Our contact information is here. We're happy to answer any other questions, and the slides link is there one more time. So I'll turn it back over to Kathy in case there's